When we say that El Puente is a community, it means that there's different people that are involved. What unites us, what we want to see happen is that we know God better, so that we can love God better, so that we can serve God better, loving and serving others here and to the ends of the world. And in order to do that, it requires that we all do our part. And we want to invite you to participate with us. There are many things you can do to do this. You can participate of the different activities and events that we have throughout the week. We have a prayer meeting. We have meetings for different groups of people. And if you would like to know more about them, if you would like to participate, you can do it through the contact form that you will see the information here, and it will also be shared at the end of this broadcast. If you have any comments, if you have a prayer request, please let us know through this form. We would love to pray for you and do anything we can to help you know God better. We will also welcome, if you think that what we're doing is worth it, and if God would lead you to make an offering to El Puente. You can do it through our bank information, or you can contact us, again using the form, and we'll work out the best way for you to do it. Please ask God if He would have you do something for us. If not, that's fine. He provides for us, and we are very much at peace about that. And another thing I would like to ask you, we believe that what we present here is something that is worth for other people to hear, to be exposed to. If you share in this belief that we want this message to go out to as many people as possible, please subscribe or like in our different social media platforms, because that helps it to be pushed so that many more people can know about it and can be exposed to it. We appreciate that this is not a solo effort, this is not a small group of people that do all this, but we're all joining in knowing God better so that we may love God better and we can make Him known to many, many more. Thank you. We have been talking about forgiveness, and one of the things that I hope, or I'm pretty sure you understand by now, is that this is a huge subject. It is throughout all the Bible, and it is something that touches us in the very depths of who we are. We realize how much our sinful nature does not want to forgive. But what we have been looking at is that we forgive because we have been forgiven by God. In fact, the first thing that we looked at is that the way that God forgave us is the way that we ought to forgive. And we saw that God's forgiveness is out of love and out of a desire for a relationship. It's a forgiveness that is willing to pay a price without asking anything in return. It's out of grace. And that is how we should forgive others. We also learned that there is no sin that God will not forgive. And what that means for us is that no matter what the other person has done to us, we can forgive them. There is not a hurt that has been done to us that we should say, oh, I could never forgive that. We can forgive anything. And then last week we were looking at the fact that as we understand and live out the fact that God is a sovereign God in control of all the universe, that gives us a great freedom to forgive. Because if we believe that God is at work, even if those very hard situations where somebody betrays us, where somebody takes advantage of us, where somebody hurts us, that God was there not just present but active and bringing it all to His perfect design for our lives, then we can forgive because we realize that God is at work in those situations. Today, I want us to look at how is it that we feel when we are offended and how that plays out in our difficulty to forgive. In order to do that, I would like to touch on a few scenes from the life of David. We've already talked a little bit about David, but this is more of an overview of his life. At the time, Saul was king over Israel. God had chosen him as king, and he was somebody who looked the part. And in fact, in the beginning, he was a good king. He started fighting against Israel's enemies and started bringing peace and started bringing prosperity to the kingdom of Israel. He united the tribes behind him. But very soon he became enamored with the fact that he was king. He liked the power. He liked all the perks that came with being king, and started pushing God aside, not paying attention to him. So God decided he would not be king anymore. And he told the prophet Samuel that he had already chosen the next king of Israel, and that was David. And one day David, young kid, he was out on the fields taking care of his father's sheep, not knowing that his life was about to change radically. When I imagine a servant came and said, "Hey David, your father wants you back in the house." So David leaves the sheep in charge of somebody else. He goes back to the house, and there is the prophet of Israel, Samuel, who anoints him as the next king of Israel. And from that moment, we believe it was around a time when David was like 12, 13 years old. David knew that one day he was going to become the king of Israel. We have that whole deal with Goliath, where David defeats the giant enemy of the Israelites and starts making a name for himself. And by that time, David was already part of the palace of Saul. Saul had called him because he was advised that when David would play music for him, this pains, this torment that he would feel from an evil spirit would go away. And then when David defeats Goliath, he has a great standing in the court of King Saul. But there the problems begin, because Saul was aware that he would not be king forever. And he also starts seeing how people start acknowledging David as a great warrior, as a person worthy of following. In fact, they start a song where they say, Saul killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And that made Saul angry. During that time too, David becomes very close friends with Saul's son, Jonathan, heir to the throne, captain of his army. And Saul did not like that. And more, Saul is developing this anger towards David and starts scheming in his mind to kill him. And one time, as David is playing for King Saul so that his pain will go away, so that he will feel better, Saul just becomes so enraged that he tries to kill him by throwing a javelin against him. But he had bad aim, and David is able to escape. This will happen once again later. But David is worried about his life, and he decides he needs to flee. So he had married one of Saul's daughters, Michal. And he's back in his house, and he tells Michal, he's like, your father is out to get me. He wants to kill me. And Michal loved David and helps him escape. And when Saul comes to try to get David out of his house to kill him, he realizes that he has been tricked into thinking he was there, but he wasn't. And he gets angry with his daughter Michal and says, why are you helping my enemy? And Michal tells him, well, he told me he was going to kill me if I didn't help him, which was a lie. But we see that the allegiances were more towards David than towards Saul. And later, David asked Jonathan to help him figure out if he can go back to the palace or if he needs to get away for good. And the way that happens, they have a whole deal worked out and how they're going to find out. And basically, Jonathan, as he's celebrating a special meal with his father, David doesn't show up. He was supposed to be there. And so Saul starts asking Jonathan, where is David? He was supposed to be here. And Jonathan says, well, I gave him permission to go back home because he wanted to celebrate this feast with his family. And Saul becomes really, really angry. And he says, you're the son of a rebellious woman. He says, don't you understand that as long as David is alive, you will never be king, and your household is not going to be safe? And Jonathan says, but what has he done? Why do you want to kill him? And Saul doesn't answer that. Actually, the way he answers it is that he grabs a spear and he tries to kill his son Jonathan. That is how angry Saul was at David and anybody who would show any favor to David. David has to escape. and a lot of things happen. Saul is chasing after him. And there are a couple of instances when David has Saul right there, and he could kill him. He could think, you know what? God said that I was going to be the next king. I cannot be king while Saul is king, and he's right here. I could kill him and become king, but he doesn't do it. He always respects Saul as the chosen one by God to be king, and waits for God's timing to be the right one for him to become king, which will happen later in the story. But I would like for us to look here at Saul's attitude towards David. And in fact, Saul, his role in the biblical story is a little bit of a foil, it's a contrast to the qualities that David will exhibit as leader and as king. And what we see about Saul, I want to stop at a couple of points with what happens when Saul's son Jonathan and daughter Michal help David escape from the wrath of King Saul. And it tells in Scripture when Michal helps David escape, Saul comes and tells Michal, "Why have you deceived me thus and let my enemy go so that he has escaped?" And Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" But what I want us to pay attention here is the way that Saul refers to David. "Why have you deceived me thus and let my enemy go?" And here's an important question. Who had decided that David was an enemy to Saul? David had been playing for Saul. He had been fulfilling a role in the palace so that Saul could be at peace, so that he could reign. He had fought not only against Goliath, but he was a leader of the armies of Israel against the Philistines. He was a good servant of the king. It was Saul who decided at one point, David is my enemy. And we're going to look at why he decides that. But what I would like for you to see here is that David has not really done anything to let Saul think he's my enemy, he's against me. David has been a good subject. He has been a good soldier and a good servant. But it is Saul, in his anger, in his dissatisfaction, that decides to make David his enemy. And part of it is what we see when he gets angry at his son Jonathan. In that scene where they are at the special meal, and Jonathan tells him that he has let David go to his hometown. The biblical narrative tells us Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, his son, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse," that's David, "lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" And in an amazing scene, Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Saul's anger against David had become so great that when he starts to think that Jonathan, his son, has an allegiance to David, and that Jonathan, his son, is willing to give up the kingdom so that David will have it, he makes his son his enemy and wants to kill him. He wants to get rid of him. He thinks that that is going to set things right. And when we look at the story, it would be very easy for us to think, well, you know, these are the ragings of a madman, of somebody who anger has gotten the best of him. But I want to submit to you that that's what happens to us many times. People do things to us that make us angry, that don't let us see things as they really are, that don't let us consider things outside of that hurt that we're feeling out of what this person has done to us. What we see in Saul, these are the assumptions that Saul makes about David. First of all, he assumes that David is his enemy. He says so. He tells Michal, you have helped my enemy, when David had not done anything against Saul. And isn't that what happens sometimes? Somebody hurts us, or we are hurt by someone, and we assume that their intentions were to cause us harm, that they are our enemy. They are doing this because they want to get rid of us, or they want to harm us. Saul also assumed that it was David that would cause him a loss. Even though Samuel the prophet had told Saul before David comes into the scene that God had taken the kingdom away from him, Saul gets fixated on the fact that David is going to be the next king. And he thinks that it is David that is going to take the kingdom away from him. And David could have done that. He had the chance to kill Saul, but he didn't do it. He chose to live according to God's law and not touch the Lord's anointed, as he calls him. It's not David that's causing him the loss. Saul brought it upon himself. And sometimes that's what we do. We don't realize that the pain that's coming to us is a result in whatever part. It might be a small part or it might be a major part. We're bringing that pain, that hurt upon ourselves, but we choose to think that it is this one person that's at fault completely for what's happening. And that's what Saul did about David. Saul went as far as to see anybody that would help David to be against him, even his own children, his daughter Michal and his son Jonathan. It's like, hey, if you're going to do something for David, you are against me. You are my enemy too. And in fact, he tries to kill his son Jonathan. That's the amazing thing. But we do the same. And it's one of the saddest things when there's disagreement or friction between two people, that they want the greater circle to take sides. You see it a lot, for example, in divorce. The couple is fighting against each other. They're mad at each other. They're thinking the other person is out to get them, to cause them harm. And they start talking to their friends. And they want to convince their friends, the common friends, that they're friends to the couple, not to one or the other individual, but they want them to take sides. It's like, if you're not with me, then you're with her. You're against me. Or, if you're on my husband's side, then you're against me. And you start coloring your whole life, all of your relationships in terms of this disagreement, of this conflict that you have with that one person. And finally, the main problem that Saul had, and it has to do with what we looked at last week, which is the fact that God is sovereign and he's always acting in every event of our lives. I don't understand how, but somehow Saul thought that even though God had already decided that he would not be king, somehow, if he got rid of David, God would not do that. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with the way God works. But somehow Saul erased everything else and became fixated on David. And he thought, that's why he tells Jonathan, hey, if we get rid of David, if I kill him like I want to, then you will become king after me. But his thinking is not, you're just going to become king. It's like, I'm going to live out my life as king, and then Jonathan is going to become king. But you see, all of these are assumptions that Saul makes. None of them are true. That was just his twisted thinking. And it's not because he was an unusually evil person. That's how our fallen nature works. We want to justify ourselves, and a big part of that is making somebody else the enemy and the one that's at fault for everything that happens to us. There's another passage in the Bible that it might be very familiar, but that I want us to look at a little bit closely. Well, first of all, let me tell you, be very careful regarding what you assume about the other person in terms of their motivation. How can you be sure of their intentions? Now, I know that sometimes people, the things they do, and sometimes they'll tell you, they're doing them out of anger, out of vengeance. They want to hurt you, out of competition. They want something that you have, they want to take it away from you. Yes, but until you can be completely sure of their intentions, be careful what you're assuming about the other person in terms of their motivation to do the thing that hurts you. Try to make sure what their intentions are. Maybe ask a friend to help you figure out why that person is acting that way towards you. But until you can be sure, don't assume evil intentions. The passage that I want us to look at a little bit more careful than I think we usually do is when Jesus is on the cross, one of his last sayings. We find it in Luke 23:34. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And notice what Jesus is saying here. He's asking God the Father to forgive all of these people who have mocked him, who had betrayed him, who have taken him, dragged him to trials that were rigged, where false accusations by people that were paid off were levied against him. And on the basis of that, they condemned him to a horrible death that he was not deserving of. And while he's in the cruise, while he's experiencing all the pain of what's happening there, he tells God, "Father, forgive them." And the reason he gives for asking God to forgive them, he says, is for they know not what they do. It's similar, or actually Stephen, the first martyr of the Christian church, when he is stoned by the mob, and as he's dying, he says he sees Jesus seated at the right hand of the Father. And he asks Jesus to forgive the people that are killing him. And he says, do not hold their sin against them. So, when Jesus is saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, he is not excusing what they're doing. It is a great sin. And he's not justifying their sin. He's not justifying their actions. But he's asking for a forgiveness from the Father because, he says, these people, they really don't know what they're doing. Now, what is it that they did not know? What is it that the Roman soldiers, the religious leaders, the multitude of people that were there at the cross, what is it that they didn't know that would lead them to act that way towards Jesus? Well, first of all, they did not know the enormity of the offense. When we look at that event from here, from 2020, with all the knowledge that has developed, it baffles my mind that as Jesus has revealed himself as the Son of God, as the Messiah, as God himself, and he has proven it through the miracles. He has taught it time and time again. He has stated he has come to save mankind from their sins. This small group of religious leaders, because they get jealous of his popularity, because they're concerned that the establishment, the Romans, are going to take power again away from them, they decide to kill him. And they think that they can kill God, crucifying him. That is huge. Not to mention the different things they do, the treachery, the trickery, the abuse of justice, of power that happens is sin at so many levels, and it's huge. And they think they can get away with it. They don't know that God knows exactly what's happening and what they're doing. And sometimes the people that hurt us, they really don't realize how bad what they're doing is. Just by the fact that we have been created in God's image, that we are bearers of that image, that God cares and loves for us, to have somebody attack us, to have somebody want to harm us, to destroy us, is an offense against God. And people don't see that. They don't see that every time a human being is attacked, it's an attack to God. And maybe we need to realize that more and more so we can start treating each other the way we should. What the people did not know, the people that were there at the foot of the cross, is that hurting another person will not solve the situation. They thought that by crucifying Jesus, the religious leaders thought everything's going to go back to how we had it. We're going to keep our life of privilege. The Romans were thinking, you know what, we get rid of another rebel and we go back to the Pax Romana. We go back to having things calm. And I don't know what the people were thinking. I think they were just there for the spectacle. They were just shouting whatever they were told to shout. But everybody was thinking, this is a good thing. This is going to result in good things for us. They did not know that God was at work, and yes, it was going to result in good things because God meant it to, but not what they expected to be. And that's related to the next thing they did not know. They did not know the consequences of their actions. They didn't know the judgment that was going to come upon them because they had attempted to kill the Son of God. And it was a great offense that God was not just going to let go, because God is a just God. And we have this promise in the Bible that no good deed will go unrewarded, and no evil deed will go unpunished. We don't have the details of how that's going to happen, but we know that God will do justice for every single thing that we do, for every word that we utter, for every thought that we have, for every intention of our heart. Much more for our actions, for our evil actions. In our experience, sometimes we think, or it might be that the person that hurt you thought that by causing you harm, by hurting you, his life would be better off, or his problem would go away. It doesn't. In fact, it becomes worse because now they have broken a relationship that could have been different. Again, I'm not saying that we should all be best friends with everybody and do vacations together. It just means that we can all get along in the right way, in the correct way. We can live trusting that God is the one that will bring about justice. We don't have to try to bring it about ourselves. Because in the end, like we were looking at last week, we can trust God. It is when we don't think God is acting for our well-being, God is not bringing us to the point that we were created to come to, that we're not going to live the life that we're meant to live. When we don't think that God is doing all those things, we want to take matters in our own hands. We want to make them happen in our own strength, in our own power, in our own understanding. And that's when we start seeing other people as obstacles. And we start thinking, if only this person would be out of the picture, then I will be all right. As you think about how you've been hurt in the past, and again, maybe during this time, these messages that we've been sharing, there's a particular event in your life that you keep going back to, a person that hurt you. I want to invite you to evaluate whether you have absolute certainty that what you assume about the person that hurt you is correct. It might be that all this time you've been thinking that he did it out of pure evil, that there's not even a real reason, that person is as evil as they come, and he just chose you to inflict his evil upon. And I doubt that's the point. Try to think, what What is it that they did not know that led them to hurt you? Is it that they don't have faith in God? Is it that they don't trust in God's plan for their lives, or they don't trust that God is the one that brings about justice? Is it that they are so afraid of what's going to happen to them that they're not willing to let go of certain relationships or things, that they want to control what's around them? They want to control you. And in doing that, they hurt you. What would bring this person to do what they had done to you? What were they thinking they could accomplish? And it might be that God gives you a great compassion for them, for the lostness. Ask God to forgive them, like Jesus did. Jesus asked God to forgive the people that were completely, utterly rejecting him. Not just rejecting him, but inflicting pain on him, wanting to destroy him. And Jesus said, forgive them. And as you consider all this, my prayer is that you will forgive. Let's ask God that he will work out that in our lives. Father, what a hard thing it is to forgive, especially when we have a certainty that we have been wronged, that the other person is wrong and needs to pay for what they did. But I pray that through the example of Jesus and through the work of the Holy Spirit, you will give us a sense of the true motivation, the true intentions, the thinking in this person's heart and mind that led them to do what they did to us. It might be that they didn't even know what they were doing. And I just pray, Lord, that you will lead us to a point where we understand them, maybe have compassion on them, so that we can ask you in all honesty that you will forgive them. And that as we know that you have forgiven them, we will forgive them too. Because you forgave us, we can forgive. And as we reflect you in that aspect, we pray that you will be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.